All right. Well, I have a 1:32 here this afternoon. We can go ahead and get started. I'm Randy Gottfried, Director of Classroom Support Services. I want to thank you for being part of this campus budget meeting, the second one of the quarter. You may have heard us talking a little bit. We do have a short presentation for you for this afternoon, a shorter presentation to cover some new updates and some needed information for you. And then after that, we are going to open it up for questions, and we'll have a larger time period for questions. That'll be nice. As we also have heard some feedback that you want to see the questions, you want to be able to see the text of the questions as we go through them. I'm going to take the text that's coming in from the question and answer box. So the same process we have been using, put your questions into the Q&A box. I'm going to copy that over to a Word document and then share it for you. That way you can see the question, you'll be able to read it along with my narration of it, my moderation of it. And then the appropriate E-team member or the president will answer that, or we'll get back to you depending on the nature of the question and what's being asked. We've also taken steps to improve President Roberts' internet. There was some times we didn't have the best audio, didn't have the best Zoom connection. Mainly, I believe that was from internet problems looking at the Zoom log. So we have taken some steps to improve that. We'll give it a go today and hopefully have a much better connection. But please know that we always are trying to improve and make the sessions as good as possible. We welcome your feedback, we welcome your suggestions, and depending on what they are and the limits of the product, we'll try to adapt accordingly. So feel free to go ahead and start putting in your questions. And for now, I'll turn it over to President Roberts. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy, so much, and thank you for your technical assistance and always being such a gracious moderator. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate the time and that you're devoting to learning more about what's happening around the college budget. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about COVID and where we are and some of the plans going forward for winter, and then some updates. We've just made a few changes that we'd like to share with you that I think are important based on some new information that we received from the state board and obviously from the Office of Financial Management, as well as information from our own enrollment this quarter that has changed slightly some of our budget scenarios, which importantly has changed the amount of reduction we need to do for the 2021 academic year, and that's always a positive thing. So with that, I'm going to start with our current COVID update. Thank you, Randy, for the next slide. So as many of you are aware, we are now under the governor's higher education reopening plan, which does not follow any of the directives that he's giving counties in our state. So we are under that jurisdiction right now, and we are following it for all of the programs and any employees who are currently on campus, providing service or any teaching that's going on campus, and we are following those plans closely. We ask that for everyone's safety that you only come on campus if you've been authorized. If you need to come to campus, please speak with your executive team member and they will give you authorization to do so. We do have a process to do that, and of course using our campus access form is part of that process to come to campus. But the first is those who know they're authorized, continue to do that work and continue to use that process. If you would like to come on campus for whatever reason, please talk to your executive team member to get that authorization. We do have our pickup and or return items, both for students and for employees. And please use the curbside pickup and drop off process that has been outlined. And you can find all of that on our webpage, our COVID webpage. And we are remaining remote. I sent out an email about that, but I just wanted to reiterate that through winter quarter of 2021. We know that there's going to be some difficult times potentially ahead of us with the flu. And so on top of COVID, and so we wanted to make sure that we could signal clearly to both you and our students that we will be mostly remotely Again, we do have some hands-on learning through our professional technical programs on campus, and they are following the governor's higher education reopening plan as it stands today, and following the Department of Health protocols as well. Next slide, please, Randy. So I want to talk a little bit about the changes that we've made and what we've been doing since our last conversation on September 29th. We have been conferring with both our union leadership and our student leaders, and talking with impacted employees to discuss any alternative solutions during fall quarter. And as you will note, when Vice President Beck talks about the change in our budget scenarios, we have identified and spoken to all those employees who, because of the change in the amount of dollars that we're looking at, they've all been spoken to as well. So just let you know, we're not sharing anything that we have not shared with any impacted employees. That, of course, is the most respectful thing to do. And again, our major focus is on job preservation as we look at a budget situation that is really caused by the pandemic and enrollment drops, and of course, loss of revenue due to the pandemic from the state. We continue, as I said, to adjust the budget scenarios. We do know that they're stabilizing now. And we did get some information from the state board through the Office of Financial Management that we could ease off of the 15%. They didn't tell us exactly the percentage, but they said that 15% was something that we could back away from. And so we have under the direction, in some ways, of guidance, I would say. Guidance is probably a better selected word. Under the guidance of the state board, we are moving to 10%, as most of our colleges are doing across the state. And just to let everyone know, on the 28th of October, we will be having our board meeting to adopt our budget. We did do a continuing resolution at their board meeting in June because of the information not being as clear as we would like to build a budget that could be balanced, not knowing a lot of different factors. And we feel like we have more of those factors in place. And again, our big indicator is our fall enrollment. It's a leading indicator for the year for our enrollment. And so we feel as though we have enough data points to be able to build a budget that is balanced and also is thoughtful and prudent, given all the other factors in our midst, in our environment, which also deal with the pandemic. And then we would like our final notification on reductions in force. We anticipate that happening in early December. And of course, we will follow our collective bargaining agreements as well as our administrative and exempt contracts. Next slide, please. I'm going to ask Vice President King to come and talk about our enrollment.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being with us today. What you see in front of you is a slide that represents fall quarterly enrollment. And as a note of change, if you remember correctly, in the last two presentations, both at the board and the broader budget meeting, we had a 5-year trend data slide. This simply is around fall quarter. And it represents FTE, so it's FTE for this quarter only, it's not annualized. What you see highlighted in yellow are probably some significant things, but again, there's data across the board, similar categories that presented last time. The very top line is our total FTE. And again, we drew this from yesterday morning, so it's fairly up to date. 4237 compared to same day last year at 4803. Previous year final 4823. All of you, some of you are very aware we pick up some FTE as we move through the term. Overall change for the quarter is we're down about 12%, 11.8. And then the categories that are below the 5 following rows are those that comprise the total. That's last time we're trying to set up the slide in a way that ensures that people understand. So they are exclusive categories. So all of those 5 lines add up to the total. International contracts at 660, same day last year at 26, down by about 20%. State supported 3039 compared to last year, this time 3414, down about 11%. Our CEO LCN is down a little bit, 7.5%. Our running start is up slightly, 8.3%, which is fantastic for us and suggests the great relationship we have with our partners and the work we're doing. And it is, as a reflection, it's about 6% of our total FTE. So we're aware of the size of that group. And then other, which predominantly is a couple of miscellaneous pieces, but predominantly that other, which is 22, is our Tradel students. If people know about who they are, there's 17 of them, and then we have 5 miscellaneous. And then the numbers below are earmarks. We separate those out because what happens with those categories is sometimes, in some cases, the funding formula is different, whereby the FTE amount counts differently. So it's instead of a standard 1.0 FTE, it might be 1.3. Or in some cases where you see international, but it's above, remember that we don't get FTE reimbursement, really, we get about 2% back. Categories there, just so people are familiar, because we've used them a lot. Worker retraining, slightly down. Aerospace, slightly down by 30%. As noted, I would also let you know on the worker retraining, that does seem down. It is interesting because we should be in a mode where we actually are having students on worker retraining. There's been a lot of things that have gone on in terms of how people in the community are supported. Many of you are aware that there were dollars that were flowing to support people, and we weren't necessarily hitting hard on unemployment. We may be seeing some of that shift right now. We're working, our Director of Workforce, Sabina Garrett, has updated us that we expect those numbers to actually rise during fall quarter. New to Shoreline, which is a significant number we should pay attention to, down about 26% by in head count, right? It's 392 in FTE. Remember, there's a lot of pass-through there. So as we continue to move through the year in winter and spring, those are students we count on staying with us. We do pick up new students each quarter, but generally speaking, fall's our biggest quarter and we carry them through and then into the next year as well. So we're gonna have to double down on our marketing efforts to pick back up as we hopefully move away from remote operations at some point. And then the categories for veterans, slightly down at 11%. Online FTE is up, basic skills FTE down for the quarter. Again, remember, I'd say to this before, basic skills includes ABE and ESL domestic. ESL international is in the international contract line. And basic skills domestic is down by about 15.2%. That is a category, if most of you don't know though, that actually is an area where we generally pick up more enrollment sometimes through the quarter. And it fluctuates a lot because there's a lot of by-hand registration. So that's by no means final for that particular category. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Roberts.
Thank you very much, Vice President King. I want to talk just briefly about new Shoreline students. That's also an important indicator for how that's going to be for the following year. So if we are also down in new students, those students are hopefully retained and they move into students who come back each quarter and then again in the fall. So that also is an indicator that we are very mindful of. And again, it's some of the efforts that we're doing this year around guided pathways and around closing opportunity gaps and retaining more of our students. That's going to be very, very important given that we have a lower new student number this year, and that will have an impact as we move into 21, 22. So just something for us all to think about, just things that we think about, obviously an executive team and administrators do, but as a whole college, those are important data points for us to look at as we move forward and begin to understand the behavior of our students during COVID and of course post-COVID, which may be quite different than what we've experienced in any past quarter or year. The next slide is going to introduce Vice President Beck, and she's going to walk us through a few slides and then we're going to open up to questions. Thank you. Vice President Beck.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Roberts. Next slide, please. So what we're going to cover today is the draft budget for this current year. The first column that you see is the 2019-2020 actual results. the budget this year is being built on last year's actual rather than last year's budget, since we have that year completed. The next column is the 2021 proposed budget. And then the third column is the change from our actual results last year and the revenue and expense changes that we have already seen this year. And then the middle column, as it drops down further, is the proposed changes to get to a balanced budget. So in the first column, you'll notice that last year we had a $1.1 million deficit. We need to reduce our budget this year by that amount to get to a balanced budget. Then as we move over into the third column, the first thing that we have is our state allocation. As Dr. Roberts said, initially that was projected to be a 15% decrease, and it's now at about a 10% decrease in the state allocation, which is good news. It's a much lower drop. It's been a great relief for all of us. Then the next is the percentage tuition revenue that we're projecting based on the current quarter actuals that Dr. King, VP King just showed us. We're projecting the 10% in general tuition revenue decrease, 20% decrease in international revenue. Running Start, we're showing is up 5%, and CEO, we're projecting to be down 10% for the year. So in total, it's a revenue decrease of $3.2 million. Then adding into that is the COLAs that were contracted COLAs that we honored this year for the faculty and classified staff. And then the prior year deficit gives us a total of a $5.2 million deficit that we need to, and it's a permanent deficit. So we're hoping that these numbers over time will increase as we get some relief from COVID and the state budget recovers and people start returning to school. But it's not, as we've seen with COVID, it's not going to be a fast fix. So these are permanent reductions that we need to make, and then in time the college can grow again. So to solve this $5.2 million gap, we were able to go back and find some more non-personnel savings. We reduced travel, audit fees, things like that. Remember, in January, we saved $2.5 million, and most of that was in non-personnel. So we really had kind of become as efficient as we possibly could, and we were able to find a little bit more. In the spring, we had some personnel reductions. And then we have also had some student and voluntary personnel reductions to kind of help ease that $5.2 million. Then we have the full year savings of the proposed personnel reductions are $5.3 million for a total reduction of $7.4 million. If this was a full year budget, we would have a surplus of $2.2 million. But you'll see going a little further along why that is really essential to have right now. And as part of going through this process really slowly and really carefully and preserving as many of our people as possible, we didn't take any quick actions in July. We didn't suddenly let a bunch of people go or do a bunch of furloughs, but we wanted to make sure that there was time for possibly the news to improve, which it has, and that we are operating with the best information possible. So the cost of that is, well, the benefit of that is that we've held on to our staff and our people as long as possible. So over the course of the year, as we do these slow, thoughtful reductions, the cost of that is $1.8 million. And so the total bottom line this year is projected to be positive by $397,000, which is not very much. That's essentially a balanced budget. Now remember, this budget is our operating budget. So it's only the accounts 0921, 149, 101, 3EO, for those of you who are familiar with those account numbers. This isn't any of our funded accounts. So part of government accounting is we have the money that we get from tuition in the government to do our general operations. Then we have other accounts that are considered to be funded. Money comes in and expenses are made, and those accounts normally go to zero every year. But what we'll show you next is that due to COVID, we have some expenses and reductions in revenue in our funded accounts that we're going to have to make up out of our operating budget. So let's go to that next slide, please. So this is our cash use projection for this year. We started the year with $23 million in the bank. And as we've seen in previous slideshows, there are board reserves on that of $12 million. And then we have commitments against that cash that we actually have to spend this year. There's a roundabout that the city of Shoreline is requiring us to purchase related to the student building that's $2 million. And then moving the dental program to the University of Washington is going to cost $1.3 million. So we have $3.3 million of our cash committed to spend this year. And then the next in the blue box are costs related to COVID that are in excess of the revenue that we've received that we're going to need to fund out of operating. Now, this is unique to COVID. We would not normally plan to run deficits in any of these accounts, and they are just specific to the COVID crisis. So we did receive COVID grants. So we received the CARES money of $1.2 million and about $360,000 of gear funds. So it's good to get some relief, and that helps a lot. The uses for that cash is our housing debt service. So before COVID hit, the housing was at and above the occupancy that we needed to break even. So we were planning for it to send a little bit of cash into operating every year, and it was doing that. As soon as COVID hit, we lost half of our occupancy. So we have to pay the bond on student housing until COVID clears and we can get our occupancy back up. And so the cost of that, the loss last year from when COVID started through the end of this fiscal year is going to be about $1.5 million. We have reduced revenue from parking permits due to COVID. That used to help go support operations in the campus. As soon as we furloughed our staff from the child care center, we incurred a loss there, and the DSHS funding that goes along with that. We had a number of events canceled, and that is a direct cost to the campus that is normally self-funding, that we have to support those refunds. And we've had a lot of computers and PPE to purchase. To date, we've spent about $750,000 or $800,000. We think that by the time we get to the end of the fiscal year, that will be up at $1.5 million, and that includes ideally returning to campus in the spring, and the measures that there will be additional costs as we have students and staff returning to campus, where we'll still have to be testing. And then there is a faculty COVID impact. The faculty have a COVID impact bargaining going on with a significant but unknown cost at this point, which would also have to be paid out of operating, but the amount is unknown, and so it's not in this. But currently that is showing $1.6 million that we're going to have to support out of cash reserves and eventually fund out of our operating revenue. So there's our operating revenue, the $397,000 this year, which is just the bare minimum. So we will have a use of cash this year related to COVID expenses that we're hoping to recoup in future years when the economy recovers and our enrollment goes up. So we started our total, let me see here. So our total cash started out at 23 million, and we're expecting to end the year at almost $19 million, a slight reduction in cash. We use $4 million a month in cash, so that's $1.6 million worth, I'm sorry, 1.6 months worth of operating cash, or 4.7 months if we spent through the reserves also. So we have a little bit less than half a year to operate on, which it should be a little higher than that. So I think that's all. So next I'd like to introduce Veronica Zura, Executive Director for Human Resources.
Oh, next slide, please. So this is an updated version of the slide we presented at our last Zoom hall meeting. The numbers for 1920 remain the same. That is the reductions that we made with noticing in January that impacted cuts we needed for the 2019 fiscal year budget. The update information on this slide is for 2021, and you'll notice that it is in highlight, and what it reflects is the reductions, the updated number of reductions being made based on the new amount at about 5.2, 5.3 million, as opposed to the upwards of 7 to 8 million we were originally having to address. Specifically within the admin exempt line, again, we've split it out between filled reductions and vacant reductions across all three categories. So for admin exempt, you can see that filled reductions are at 5, vacant reductions are at 2. That is a total of 7 position lines overall for the year. For classified staff, it is reduced to now 8 filled reductions and 13 vacant reductions, for a total of 21 reductions in the classified ranks across the year. Full-time faculty filled reductions is down to 12. Vacant reductions remains at 4, and that gives us a total of 16 reductions for full-time faculty positions across the year. And that final column again is going to show based on the actual people in a job. So filled positions, the filled reductions impacted by employee type. So for admin exempt this year was 6.25%, classified 4.57%, full-time 7.89%. And then the bottom bracket, as I'm looking at it, I did some quick math, and something seems to have gotten lost in translation, because this bottom box is representing the difference between the 2 years. So reductions by percent who lost their job in 2019 and 2020-21, and divided by 2. And somehow that number's off. The number should actually be for admin exempt with our updated reduction numbers, 4.83% reduction in filled jobs across the 2 years. Classified is 2.29% in reductions in filled positions across the 2 years. And full-time faculty is 4.29% in filled positions across the 2 years reflected here. So I will get that updated information included on this slide and sent out for reference for anyone looking back, but I did want to point it out when I'm going through this information. Now, I know that Cheryl has repeated this earlier on in the presentation, and I want to say it again. We are trying to preserve as many positions as possible, and we are getting updated information sometimes on a daily basis. And so there is going to be, a constant review to see where we can identify any positions that can come off this list. And we're hoping to have more updates to give you throughout the year, but this is where we're at right now. Next slide.
So the next slide just is some important dates coming forward. Again, October 28th is our regular board meeting. It has been updated. We're doing a shorter study session with the board instead of from 3 to 4:30, from 3:30 to 4:30. So that's been changed from the last time we met, with our regular Zoom meeting starting at 4:30, everything again on Zoom. As opposed to a regular meeting, it's going to be a special meeting because we are now still operating in a Zoom environment. And then we'll have our next Zoom hall budget update on October 29th after the board meeting. And again, from 1:30 to 3, we'll try to do the same, keep the information very compacted and concentrated so that we have the most time to answer questions and be with you all. So with that, that really wraps up our presentation, and we have about an hour, a little less, 58 minutes to answer questions. So Randy, please, let's go to the questions.
All right. And we have had some questions come in. Continue to use the Q&A feature of Zoom to put in your questions. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to copy them to a Word document and share them out. So let me share out our first question here. And the first question asks, have students been surveyed regarding their experiences at Shoreline Community College since the college has moved into remote operations? There seems to be little consistency across departments and programs in how they operate. And with additional proposed cuts to frontline staff and faculty, it is hard to imagine that this will improve. For example, some students have complained about waiting for resources to return their call and email, or being unable to speak with a live person in the moment.
So I'm not aware of any surveying, but I'm going to ask both Dr. Herrera as well as Vice President Herrera and also Vice President King to answer. I do know that we have had conversations about creating more live opportunities for students, and I know we have put some things in place, so I'll let them address this question. And thanks for the question.
There hasn't been an official survey that has gone on regarding student quality of life at Shoreline since the college moved to remote operations. But what we do know is that students have been very vocal about the types of needs that they have. And we have, through our emergency aid application, we know to a great extent what's going on with our students who have the most demonstrated need for support. Certainly, we are trying to do our best to make sure that we're improving our interface with the community and making sure that the communication is strong and that we are answering phone calls, returning phone calls right away, and getting quicker. As you can imagine, this has been a hard shift for everybody, and we are trying to be as proactive as we possibly can to make sure that none of our students have to wait for long periods of time to get a return on their question.
Vice President King, are you aware of any surveying?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Herrera. I would just add that I'm trying to really pay attention to the question again. I have not done a survey separately, so I'll just respond in the same manner as she did. I will say I do believe this is really about frontline staff, but frontline staff and faculty also include those in programs right now. So we do have a number of programs on campus, and I regularly am interacting with them as our COVID site supervisor, Caitlin Eggeman, is, and getting updates almost every day about what's going on. We have direct feedback from them. In fact, met with people this morning about updates about campus. And I do regularly hear from students specific to their concerns about those programs and their need, and the faculty and their needs. And we're trying to be responsive within a day as it regards any of those programs, services, needs, supports, or any concerns around COVID specifically, or even indeed any changes that are being requested, especially as we're considering things like going into winter, it raining a lot and becoming cold. The last thing I would comment on is, again, frontline. The deans in my area and all my executive directors have an expectation to meet regularly with their staff that are monitoring phone call and intake through themselves, their program coordinators, senior secretaries, AA4s, to ensure that we're responsive to students or faculty. And if that is not going on, I would appreciate hearing more about it, but I do not, my team is expected to do, quick follow-up and response and navigate and monitor all forms of communication coming in and out.
I will add to that we have initiated a feature so that there are some must-have features that we've worked aggressively to try to implement for a virtual student services platform, which include online appointment scheduling, making sure that we have Zoom waiting rooms, and just being as responsive as we possibly can in this remote environment, knowing that our students are all over the world now, in their homes working remotely, and are all in different time zones. And that includes the chat implementation that we did last spring to try and make sure that we were ready to meet students where they were at.
Thank you. Randy, next question.
Thank you. The next question asks, what is the administrative exempt contract?
Each exempt administrative employee receives an annual contract, and in it, it talks about salary and information about their contract. I mean, I don't think there's more to add than that. Veronica, do you want to share a little bit about the contract?
Sure. Just one thing that is not commonly known outside of the administrative group is that we are all only ever employed on a year-to-year basis. The contract has our position stipulations. It says the period of time, which is not longer than July 1 through June 30th. We get a renewal contract each year if our position is continued. There is a clause in there that talks about if there's potential cuts needed or the ways that an admin can be separated, but it's fairly standard language in terms of an employment contract, and it's a practice commonly held at other community colleges.
Thank you, Veronica. The next question asks, what is Aerospace 1000 and is it new?
It is not new. It is an earmark that we get additional operating funds for them. Philip shared a little bit about that, Vice President King, but it is not new money. And do you want to give a little bit more, Vice President King, about the Aerospace 1000? It includes advanced manufacturing as one of the programs that is under the Aerospace 1000 FTE.
You're spot on about that, and as earmarks go, it was initiated some time ago prior to me coming to the state. Those things occur, they still occur, whereby programs are incentivized by a potential to earn additional FTE. This was one of which then we work on that program, and in doing so, any of the students we bring in additional funds to the college. That is slightly down, again, based on the particular program that it was in. It's not necessarily a reflection of the program's quality. It's just simply a matter of it's done to initiate and invest. And sometimes those things diminish over time and they often get absorbed. So they'll do it for a period of time and then the FTE boost goes away.
In this case, it has not.
Yeah.
It's now just absorbed as part of the program. Next question.
Okay, the next question asks, what is basic skills? Is that ABE transitional studies?
Vice President King.
Hello again, everybody. Yes, it is. It includes ABE. So there are categories, and I'm looking sideways because I'm just going to bring it up in the acronyms that are attached in the course schedule. So if we're looking, that are attached to ESL are any of the courses with the EAP designation. And so there are quite a few of them. And ESL designation. EAP is in international, not ESL. So basic skills ABE transitional studies include ESL designations, ESL lab designations. There's a lot of them in the schedule. And then ESLC, ESLLL, and then ABE could also include High School 21, but that's inside of ABE as well. Those are what predominantly comprises transition studies.
All right, thank you, Philip. Move to the next question here. Next question asks, what is the college doing to generate professional learning around teaching high school students?
I'm not sure about any kind of programming specifically out of student learning, but that's something that I know we have had in the past when we had very large numbers of high school students, particularly international students coming. That Vice President King, could you address that? And maybe that's something that whoever wrote the question could share with with you?
I would be probably interested in more detail around what they're thinking. I would say professional learning around teaching high school students. So we, as many of you know, we have a couple of populations of students who come to the college in a variety of ways under dual credit, dual enrollment offerings. Our CEO, SCN, Running Start students comprise that for the most part. And then again, remember too, we also have a high school completion program through our international student arena as well, and generate professional learning around teaching high school students. I can't say necessarily that in my time in 14 months, I've seen us emphasize that. If we're potentially talking about pedagogy related to an orientation for high school students, we have not discussed that. So I can be clear about that. I would say that we just did have a recent conversation with our key contact with Shoreline, Dan Gallagher, around continuing developing relationships to support high school programs and the continuity between the college and those two entities. That doesn't comprise everything, because high school students are maybe those that aren't in those two schools, and could be even someone considered high school that isn't in our region. Good question. I'd like to know more about if they have thoughts about what we'd like to do.
Thank you, Philip. We'll move on to the next question. Please explain who will be doing the work for Running Start. The loss of a technician in biotechnology seems strange, since the work will not be going away unless the program goes away. Please explain who will be doing the work.
Vice President Herrera, can you talk a little bit about Running Start, and then Philip about biotech? Thank you.
The work for Running Start is going to change for this next year, and this is something that we've been working on since spring. We're currently going through the process of identifying different ways to meet the needs of our Running Start students. The number of students has grown, of course, by about 26 students this year. So we have seen an uptick, but really we're in the process of cross-training all of our employees in advising to be able to meet the needs of those students. And so in terms of who's doing the work, we are all going to continue to do the work to meet the needs of our Running Start students within advising.
Sorry, just trying to find the unmute buttons, excuse me. I would say pretty much similarly for this particular position and biotechnology. I would say broadly, I don't want to generalize the answer, but the college right now is looking at over $5 million in general reductions to employment. None of these are easy decisions. We try to identify areas for reduction in this particular area. If this position is indeed eliminated as a reduction, which is proposed, then the work needs to be picked up by others in the area. We would have to do so. We would have to identify a way that others are able to pick up the work and still support the program, and that is intended, as the program will continue.
Thank you, Philip. Moving along to the next question. Why have you started referring to each other by your titles? Example, Vice President King instead of Philip. What does this change signify?
So I don't think that from my perspective, it hasn't been a change. We've always been using either our educational attainment or our title to describe who we are when we're talking in public. And so that's just a continuation. I don't think it signifies anything from my perspective. But I appreciate the question.
Okay, we'll move along to the next question. And they're asking, can you please include pronouns in introduction slides?
You can do that.
Okay, and the next question Given proposed course and program cuts, can you share your projections about how that will affect future enrollment? It seems like we might enter a spiral of cutting courses and decreasing enrollments, which leads to more cuts.
So I'll start the response, and then Vice President King and Vice President Beck, you might be able to also share some points of view. So we really looked at those areas where there were reductions so that we were making those kind of reductions appropriately to scale the enrollments to the actual number of FTE. As Vice President King said, these are very difficult cuts. And so our goal was and always will be to preserve as many positions as possible, knowing that we have to have a balanced budget going forward. And so that's really kind of part of our thinking as we propose these reductions are very painful. It's not something we ever take lightly, but it is where we are in order to keep moving the college forward and having a balanced budget. Philip, Vice President King, you want to talk about
Certainly, thank you.
The impact on enrollment?
Sure. You know, it is a fantastic question. We've had in my 14 months with the college, might be 15 by now, sorry, I've lost count. You know, we have a fantastic group of FPCs, I believe, who've really played a significant role in each of the divisions, who help coordinate the schedule, work closely with the deans. That's done in combination with the projection looking backward at what we've done, looking forward at what we want to offer. I'd also credit both Dr. Maring and Dr. Hamilton, who held my role previously, with helping to kind of finesse that schedule, because we're trying to also be more cost-setting in the last couple of years. And we've always had a mindful eye toward affecting future enrollment. You know, it is a very complicated thing to manage this. There is a large cost that goes along with running courses and instruction. And we want to make sure that we're doing so thoughtfully. Projections for us, if we can do so, are really around maintaining enrollment and increasing enrollment if we can. That is our goal. If we are able to do so because we arise out of the pandemic, if we're able to do so because we see students still need us and want additional courses, and as long as we can afford it, we will then try to add classes as long as they can be sustained at a level that we think is sufficient related to maintaining maximum enrollment and still bringing in enough dollars to support the college. So our schedule is going to look tighter. It does. I think people see that. We're even managing that right now for winter. It will be even tighter when we think about the proposed cuts, because we'll be cutting back in program areas where we do generate FTE. Again, to Cheryl's comment, these are not easy in any way whatsoever, and do not in any way suggest the quality of the program, the quality of the individual, and the quality of the instruction. Hard decisions in a couple of key areas that we've identified that may be possible for program reductions. I would say we are looking at the ability for, in some of those areas, to replace. So if a student were taking a course in a particular area and it is covered in the general distribution area, can that same student then take a course or courses in that same distribution area but another course designation, and were there seats available? And that was part of our projection. We looked at that to ensure that if we're reducing, could the student still get a class to fulfill the general distribution requirement? And we've identified that that is possible based on the schedule we've built. So we're thoughtful about it. It's a very complicated and difficult decision and proposal that we have in front of us, and not enviable. It was a very difficult thing to put anything on the list.
Thank you.
Thank you. Move along to our next question. Do you have a choice not to honor COLAs?
I will ask Executive Director Zura to answer, but let me just start off by saying that many of them are covered under CBAs, and so we have to honor our CBAs to start off with. We did pause that for our admin exempt for this year because that we don't have a requirement to move that forward for admin exempt, the 3% COLA. But there are ways that we can talk about, and we did attempt to do that to see if there's a way to put less pressure on the college by not offering COLAs this year. And maybe, Verona, you can talk about how that might have worked.
Sure. So as Cheryl mentioned, you don't have the choice not to implement something that is bargained into a contract, and our faculty and our classified staff are bargaining unit members. So the straight answer to that question is no. But what we do have the ability to do for locally bargained contracts, such as those with the faculty, is open up for negotiation to bargain an aspect of something that's already in place, such as the COLAs or other topics that come up as part of our regular process throughout the years to modify contract language. Within contracts that are not bargained locally, like the classified, which is bargained at a statewide level, and it's the same contract for all WFC employees, regardless of their college location of employment, we don't have the ability to make changes that apply just to Shoreline, but much like with an option for anybody under a bargaining unit, we can talk about ways to identify reductions that would be equal to or offset some of the cost of the COLAs if there's not a way to adjust the COLA itself, which is what President Roberts also referenced in terms of some of the discussions we tried to have this summer.
All right, thank you, Veronica. Moving along to our next question. We were told that prior year deficit had been around 2 million, but now it's listed as around 1 million. Can you explain why it is half as much now than we were told last academic year?
I appreciate this question to clarify, and I see that Vice President Beck has moved forward to respond to it. But it's a really good question, and I can see where there was some confusion about it, so I appreciate that question.
And so I didn't prepare the $2 million projection, but I can speak to it. Back on May 31st, after COVID had hit, the college was scrambling to figure out where will we wind up this year with all of these extra costs related to COVID, the school closing down. At that time, on May 31st, there was a deficit position of about $1.2 million. And with other unknown expenses coming in, there were additional payrolls still to be booked, and we weren't sure if all of the COVID expenses had come in yet or how many refunds would be due. So we did project at the end of June 30th to come in at $2.3 million deficit for last year. And we were really fortunate that it was $1 million less than that.
Thank you. And moving right along, the next one is a comment. Not a question, but a comment. Many students were delayed in receiving their financial aid or finishing their financial aid applications in time for fall quarter and have decided to start in winter 2021 instead. The drop in new to Shoreline is not necessarily indicative of what you would see in a typical year fall to winter. The cashier's office was also delayed over the summer since they just had students call and leave a voicemail instead of being there to answer the phones. And so some students really struggled with paying off past registration holds in time for this fall quarter. Please consider this when making assumptions about what enrollment will look like for fall and beyond. You might view how many students applied for FAFSA in Shoreline and did not start in fall. Many still missing documents that is the main barrier to starting, for example. Lots of potential for new to Shoreline in winter quarter, especially the more responsive and timely to student inquiries we are. So I want to thank you for that comment.
Let me just talk a little bit about that. In previous years, we actually did have winter was a little bit larger than fall, so that's not something that's something we have experienced in the past. And I would like to say that we do have some students who have said they are looking at deferring to winter. Those not because of not being able to get their paperwork in timely, but because they're kind of thinking about how this might all play out in their own personal lives, and of course the stressors of this COVID pandemic. So it would be fantastic if we did have an uptick in our winter quarter new students, as well as students returning students to continue their education. We're hoping that could be one of the scenarios. That's why we are looking at, we changed our enrollment scenario for both domestic and international to reflect that. And that's why we have the difference between where we talked a few weeks ago and where we are today. I do want to talk just really briefly. It's a little bit not quite on this topic, but it is important for us to remember in terms of context setting. Even though we got that positive projection or decrease in the forecast, excuse me, that's the right word I want to use, the forecast for the revenue, that came out prior to the Boeing announcement that the 787 Dreamliner was going to be moved to South Carolina. I know there's going to be another question about that coming up, but that is a big decision for us in our region. And we don't really know what that impact will be for us. And so, and we don't know what the impact's going to be about the flu along with COVID. They said that this could be a very difficult flu season. So if you have not gotten your flu shot, our healthcare providers are saying that is essential for all of our health this year. So just something for us to consider. So we can go on with the rest of the questions. I just wanted to share those 2 points.
Dr. Roberts, can I offer something just quickly in addition? If people want to know a little bit more, actually Acting Dean Malik, Lisa Malik, is a person at the forefront of our STEM initiatives. And one of our primary strategies this year is to focus on financial aid and financial aid outreach. Encouragement for the completion of the FAFSA. So that's a major strategy for her and her team. She's focused on it right now. I really appreciate this comment. And if people want to know more about that, definitely connect with her as she's helping lead that effort and doubling down her team's efforts around that. So I would please ask them to connect with Lisa if they want to know more, or they can ask me.
I'm going to ask Vice President Herrera to talk a little bit. This is her area.
Yeah, it is an issue that we're well aware of. Part of the backlog with financial aid is with the IRS and their inability to meet some of the demands with their federal closures of their offices at a really critical time. And so it's something that we've been able to mitigate through the CARES Act funding and our SIG funding, as well as emergency assistance funding available through United Way. To date, we've received over 400 applications for emergency assistance, 300 students of which we were able to support. Many of those applications were specifically because of the delay in financial aid packaging that were held up because of IRS documentation. And so I have to give kudos to the financial aid staff, as well as Gender Equity and the Benefits Hub, as well as the foundation, for really trying to troubleshoot how to best support students so that we didn't have them drop out. We didn't have them defer to winter quarter. We were able to meet them and say, okay, we have some money available to you without having to drop them for non-payment.
And Dr. Herrera, can you talk a little bit about our strategy to take our CARES Act and spread it out over multiple quarters and how that's impacting positively enrollment?
Yeah, it has been, it was a very forward-thinking decision by Dr. Roberts to say we're going to spread it out over the course of the year. We really didn't know what was in front of us at the time that we were awarded the CARES Act. Many of our colleagues within the CTC gave all of their money away when they received it because there was so much need. We've parceled that out, so it comes out to about $270,000 that we were able to disperse in CARES funds this fall. We will do that subsequently in winter quarter to a slightly lesser degree, probably about 225,000, I'm remembering off the top of my head. And again, in spring quarter for another 225,000. And so we've portioned that out. We've designed our application to be one application. We encourage people to send students that have emergency needs to the financial aid office first, instead of sending them to the foundation, so that we can have them fill out one application. We can find out what their other needs are. We provide wraparound support and triage. We were able to have a lot of contact with students of this last spring and summer because we really are trying to identify not just their financial needs, but other needs that they may have around insolvency, whether it's housing insecurity or food insecurity. We want to make sure that we provide them the most amount of support to help them alleviate their immediate as well as long-term insolvency concerns.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's very good information. Let's move on to the next question here. Which positions does the 5.3 mil reduction include? Does that count part-time faculty?
I'm going to move to Vice President King and to Executive Director Zura to respond.
I'll start first simply by saying, yes, it does include part-time faculty as a relationship to, if we have reductions in the overall schedule related to enrollment, then that schedule would tighten up. Would have less sections and therefore less expense. If you look at the slide that was presented earlier today, where we have a fall quarter, pretty substantial reduction in enrollment, then you should see an accompanying reduction in part-time faculty related. And then over the course of the year, you would see the same. I'll let Executive Director Zura respond to the other.
So I think really Philip has answered that pretty well. We haven't posted out a list of the exact position lines outside of notifying the individuals impacted and their supervisors, because we are still moving through the discussions related to final decisions on those reductions. But at some point in the near future, those will be shared with campus. Right now, we are limiting it to employee reductions by type to help preserve the confidentiality of the process.
Thank you. Move on to our next question. Will we have to pay 1.3 million to UW again for the dental hygiene move?
Let me thank you for that question. So one of the things that we were looking at, we looked at a couple of options, knowing that our long-term solution was moving to the University of Washington. And we looked at different facilities on campus, including the 1300 building that was a joint idea between the dental hygiene faculty and the administration. When we started looking at that building and the cost to create a short-term solution, it was over $750,000. That was before you even open up anything, any of the walls. And we know that a building that's over 50 years old has lots of issues. And so when we started thinking about utilizing college resources at that magnitude, I asked and turned to the dean of the University of Washington School of Dentistry, Dean Kyoto, and said, could we move sooner to the University of Washington and take those dollars and put it into a space to be remodeled for the dental hygiene program? And so that this $1.3 million is going to be used in two spaces. One, a place for the dental hygiene students at the University of Washington, where we have 10 right now who are working in the clinic, and it's going very, very well, both from the students and the dental students perspective, the fourth year who are working with our second year dental students, with of course the patients there, and among the leadership of the University of Washington School of Dentistry and our faculty and our administration. The other piece of the money is going to go to purchase simulators, which we would have had to purchase anyway to be in that space. So what we've done is, I believe, done a great job to utilize the resources of the college well, do it once, and provide the best learning experience for our students as we make our long-term solution to the University of Washington. So it is a one-time expense that we'll be utilizing at the University of Washington.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. We'll move on to the next question. Other colleges, including Edmonds, chose to do furloughs over the summer when employees could still benefit from the extra unemployment benefits for the COVID-19. This allowed those colleagues to save money. This allowed those colleges to save money via furloughs without paying an extra financial strain on the affected employees, and during a time of the year when the reduction of hours was less likely to negatively impact workload. Why didn't Shoreline take advantage of this opportunity?
Well, as you know, each college is quite different. And as we looked at the furloughs, we did have some employees, and I'm going to ask Executive Director Zurada to respond as well. But we did have some employees who did utilize the furloughs and did benefit from that. We also kept them on so that they worked one day a month so that they could receive benefits during that time. We also looked at some employees who did not have as full of a job because of because of their position and us moving remotely. And so what we did, instead of furloughing people, there were other jobs that became apparent that we needed their assistance in, so that they could have a full position and also continue their wages and their benefits at the college. Do you want to, I'm not sure if I've answered all of that question. We decided not to furlough employees because it has different impacts and different costs to them that are somewhat hidden. For instance, if we furloughed administrators, they become more like an hourly worker. They can only work 40 hours a week. And so during a time when we were still figuring out what fall looked like, that would not have been a good use of our time. So there's things like that. And we wanted to keep as many employees as we could working full time as we move forward. But we did have a few because of their position aligned with a revenue, like our Parent-Child Center, that were furloughed during that time period. So Executive Director Zura, could you fill in?
Sure, and I think you gave a pretty complete answer. I think I would just add on to that a couple of points. So Cheryl talked about summer and reassigning staff in certain areas where we had different needs for work, where they had the space in their position because of the change in remote operations from in-person. And I think an important aspect to remember is we just went through reductions in 2019-20, and we were just finished responding to the cuts we had to make across all employee groups based on those reductions. And during the summer, executive team purposely took that time, although they did put out calls for voluntary furloughs for people who did want to take advantage of the additional unemployment benefits available, to really take a look at where we could sustain potential cuts, knowing that we had at that time a 15% reduction that was being signaled to us by the state. One thing that comes up quite frequently, sometimes even in summer when we're doing our adjusted schedules, but most definitely when you have a reduction of, say, a day per week, is the work isn't going anywhere if you're just taking that day off. And what our plan this summer was to come back and make sure that we had an informed discussion, identify positions that we had a plan for what happens to that work or how we're going to make reductions, rather than just having a cut where the employee comes back and they have to then catch up on the day they missed because there wasn't anything in place to eliminate that workload. As Cheryl also mentioned, one thing that was brought out is that when you do a reduction to people who are normally considered to be overtime exempt, so basically those who are paid a salary and not paid by the hour, or those who are not eligible for overtime, it does kick you into overtime eligibility. And I think I can safely speak for most of the administration at the college in that I haven't worked a 40-hour week in quite some time. So you'd be losing more than 8 hours from me. You'd be losing the amount over the top of 40 plus that day that I took off. And there's different accounting requirements required. And I know that that's many positions at the college. So that's part of the discussion we had again this summer about being thoughtful in the reductions rather than just immediately putting something out that would have had a ripple effect in terms of impact.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. What is the status of moving forward with the demo and reconstruction of the 2500 building? Are we still slated to get funding for that even though we're in the middle of a pandemic that, as you say, has hit our college and our state hard? Is that moving the program to UW and paying $1.3 million of money that we don't have justified at this point? Also, why are we paying it instead of UW?
Okay. So the status of our 2500, the status of our Health Sciences Advanced Manufacturing Classroom Complex, which deals with the demolition of the 2500 building. Yes, we're very hopeful. We're number 1 on the list, the state capital list for community and technical colleges. And let's see, hold on for a second. Lost. And so that's very positive. The reason why the state would go forward with capital projects at this time, they see that as stimulus for communities. And so it's not just the construction and the construction companies, but all the ancillary businesses related to that. And so they see it, as I said, as a stimulus across the state. That's very positive because we are number 1 on that list. And there's a lot of support from the state board, as well as our legislators in our area. And we're very fortunate to have Senator Brock, who sits on Capitol for the Senate, and also in Ways and Means. And as well as Representative Ryu, who also sits on appropriations for the House. I think I have answered the question about the University of Washington. Oh, by the way, I should say they are also paying about $500,000 of their own dollars to help renovate the space that our dental hygiene students will be in. So they also are doing that. We do have a grant to the Delta Dental that's in consideration by their leadership of a $3 million grant to continue. It's more than 1.3 and it's more than 500,000. It's about a $3 million move over time. And so they're considering that as well. So we've looked at some grant money to come alongside us in this project.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Could you please update slide 9 with new positions and raises, not including COLAs?
If that slide needs to be updated, we will do that. I don't have the slide right in front of me, but we'll make sure that all of our slides are updated that need to be updated. Thank you.
Okay. And the next question also refers to slide 9, saying, could you please update slide 9 with part-time faculty who could be hired back in winter due to courses hidden from the schedule?
Vice President King, do you want to address that question since it deals with part-time faculty?
Sure. I mean, if that's something that we'd like to do on the slide, we can take a look at the schedule and identify courses that potentially we'll run. It's really around managing the schedule. The courses that have been hidden, it's a term used as a relationship to how the schedule functions. Those that we're concerned will not run because enrollment is low. And so we're concerned they won't actually be able to run. If they do indeed run, then we would have them filled with a variety of part-time faculty, and we can certainly have that number available.
Thank you. Moving along to our next question. Your budget information about vacancies continues to not show the estimated actual losses of associate and PA faculty. These positions and people do count, Please start showing the specifics of these well, are your budget seems inaccurate and like you are not showing real numbers.
Vice President King, would you like to respond to the part-time? I'm not sure
Of course.
how we would show that, so.
I mean, it might be similar to both the last response I gave, but it's a backward look probably as well. I think I think again referring to slide 9, which is a reflection of the previous year and the current year potential changes. As we've indicated when we talk about enrollment, forward-looking is projection, so it's broad, and may or may not impact individuals. So we don't know who those individuals are, how many. Looking backward, looking forward, we can look at a projection of sections and give some feedback, and then the potential extension to a set of individuals. It's just that sections don't equal individuals, but we can make an attempt.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Will the new DEI, Chief Diversity Officer position be on the E team? What is the expected pay rate for that new position? Will that position be considered a VP? If not, why not?
So yes, the new Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion will serve on executive team and report to me, the President. The expected pay rate, I believe, is about $90,000. I'm going to ask Executive Director Vera. I think it's between 90. It's about 90,000. Yes.
Yeah, it is about 90,000 now, but I think we're also still in the review of the final duties, so that salary may flex up or down a bit depending on some of the feedback we're getting from different groups on campus.
And then, no, this position will not be considered a vice president. We really wanted this position to focus on professional learning for our employees to help us just some critical areas, and we're still working on the job description, critical areas around policy, and really focus on professional learning for our students. Many vice presidents have larger areas of responsibility, and we know that that is really what we need. Programming, both for learning and training, as well as events that deal with our own college, working connected with students' equity and success, and making it much more an integrated experience for both our students and for our employees, as we know this is such a very important part of the work and our values here at the college. So this would be a position, and I should say we did have a meeting with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leadership Team from last year, as well as the Inclusive Excellence Steering Committee. Both of them have been working on really important work around diversity, and they both were very excited about us moving forward with this, and the recommendations that were accepted by the Inclusive Excellence Steering Committee from last year, as well as their larger plans for a multiple year diversity and equity plan. And so there was a request to continue the work that they had last year, as well as looking at our day of learning and some things along the way to help us move forward this very important initiative that's really at the heart of who we are and have been known for and what we care about the college.
Thank you. Let's move on to our next question. Since the number of admin hired in recent years increased significantly, how can you justify the percentage reduction of admin, 6.25%, being so similar to FT faculty, 7.89%?
So I'm gonna start that, and maybe Executive Director Zura, you can also talk a little bit about those who are included. Admin exempt is a large group, and so it also includes individual contributors, deans and directors, and the executive team, as well as coaches that we have in our athletic program. So we have made reductions in our admin exempt over the last 2 years, as is evidenced in the slide that was shown. And you can talk a little bit about how many exempt we started with 2 years ago, where we are now. The faculty is a larger body of full-time faculty. And so that percentage is in relationship to the number of full-time faculty and pro rata and different status of faculty who fill the ranks of the full-time faculty equivalent number that number represents. And I think there are some changes also, and that you mentioned, that needed to be updated, that need to be corrected as well.
The only other thing I would really add to that is, Cheryl, you asked about the specific number of admin that have been cut across the last 2 years, and that's 15 positions, including the potential cuts for this year. It is important to note that the college had a lot of different factors that went into the reductions made. It wasn't a flat 20% across the board. It wasn't a flat 7.5% for one employment category. You know, we looked at all of the different factors, which included the long-term needs of the college, where we thought we could take cuts in the work that is currently being done, and the opportunities around different efficiencies that could be realized. So I don't know that I have a hard and fast answer to this question. It is, as Cheryl said, a reflection of the reduction within an employee type, and that's the category of employment. And there is a significant difference in the number of people in each category of employment between classified, admin, and faculty, full-time faculty positions.
I think as we all started off, our goal this year prior to COVID was not to do any more reductions. And that because we had gone through a very painful process in 1920. And then the pandemic happened and enrollments continued to slide. And so this is really a response to that. And you know, all positions are so important at the college. And so it's very difficult to put any of them on the list. And at the same time, we have to balance our budget. And so we are in conversation. We started them, and we'll continue to have them with our union leadership to look for solutions. But knowing that we have a $5.3 million reduction that has to be made in order for us to move forward, and we need to do it now. Every month we don't do it, it adds more to our taking away from our cash balance. And so this is the time we have to start making those very difficult decisions going forward.
Thank you. Let's go on to our next question. The classified positions that were identified for cuts based on seniority or other reasons? Who has decided which classified positions are going to be cut?
So that's a little bit, Executive Director Dura, a question about the classified contract and how things work. So maybe you could start there and I can finish.
Sorry, I think my mouse batteries are dying. Yeah, so absolutely. So classified position identified for cuts. Well, as Cheryl mentioned, the classified contract does outline seniority as the factor that is part of the reduction in force process, or layoffs as they're called in the classified contract. It is one of the factors that we look at when we identify a position for impact. For example, if you have two positions that are doing, let's say in simple terms, the exact same thing, you would cut the least senior position because the person who is more senior would be able to bump the least senior person. So you have to kind of be aware of the rules in terms of how that works when you're looking at any potential reductions. It is always not that straightforward though. You might have multiple people in a particular classification, and even though the classification title is the same, the skill set required behind it, especially in the program series, is specific to an area and not just generally transferable at all levels. So it might be a component of what's reviewed, but not the only component in terms of where we think that we might be able to make a reduction or reduce the amount of work needed when we're identifying positions that might potentially be laid off from classified staff. Ultimately, the classified staff cuts come from the executive team member in that area. They are discussed by executive team as a whole, and executive team makes that decision together in terms of what we're moving forward with, because it's a balance. One person couldn't do it all on their own. We're all putting pieces together to meet the total goal needed for reductions across the year.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. We look at the full college as well and the impact on each one of the reductions across the full scale of the college, knowing that we have a daunting piece of work to reduce our budget by 5.3 million, alongside the 2.38 million we did the year before.
Thank you. Move on to our next question. Why are we cutting revenue positive programs, revenue exceeds cost, and not cutting any revenue negative high cost programs? This was part of our budget exercise a year ago.
So I think I'm going to ask the Vice President King to respond. Part of our strategy is to limit the impact of any reduction. So although some programs may be bringing in some FTE, they're not bringing in a sufficient enough FTE to cover their costs. And as I said, these are very difficult. And we looked at it over a little bit of like a longitudinal look, not just recently, but over a period of time. And so we do know that there will be some FTE that will be lost. We did look at programs where some of those offerings, that they could get offerings in other parts of the curriculum, so that there were other options, maybe not the one that particular position held, but there would be other things that in the actual degree offerings available at the college. So those are some of the things that we considered, knowing that, again, this very daunting number of 5.3 million, that's a big number, knowing that most of our non-personnel reductions had been taken last academic year. So Philip, Vice President King, do you want to talk a little bit more about that and the thinking?
Sure. President Robbins, thank you for the opener there. We're getting right close on time too, so I'll try and be short. It's a fantastic question. I sincerely appreciate it. I think we referenced this in some of your slides in the last couple of presentations. We indeed did look back at the department assessments. There are over 90 of them. They're still on the budget SharePoint site. Anyone can go look at them. They're still there. We did utilize that same information. And indeed, there are a couple of programs that are on the list. I have made the mistake in the past during a meeting when I tried to use examples of listing programs. I will not do that again today. I think it highlights individuals and I don't want to unfairly do that, but we did. We looked across everything. It is a great question. We're trying to balance in our response. Some of them are higher cost. Some are programs where we're looking at identifying ways to pick up the FTE. Very difficult decision.
Thank you. As Philip did mention, we are right at 3 o'clock. Did want to share out with you this slide again about our upcoming meetings. So we have the Board of Trustees meeting Wednesday, October 28th, study session 3:30, regular session at 4:30. That's going to be on Zoom. And our next Zoom budget hall meeting Thursday, October 29th, 1:30 to 3, also on Zoom.
So before we leave, I want to thank everyone for coming. I know these are very stressful and unsettling times, and I will be talking and sending out some information. We're less than 20 days away from an election, and I know that this is a time of consequence, both for the work that we do and for our nation going forward. And so I didn't want to not to leave our conversation and not make a comment about that. I'll be sending out some words and some thoughts about that prior to the election, knowing that one of the great places where people can have those conversations in the classroom are being facilitated by our faculty, and also in areas of our student equity and success. And students, and we all are hungering for those opportunities to have that. At the same time, we want to create a space where people can do their work, they can do it in a way that honors difference of opinion, but all comes together around a common collective goal that we have, which is serving all of our students and the diversity in which they come, and then our employees and the diversity in which they come. So again, thank you all for all your questions. I hope having more time is what we want to have, and we will answer all those that have not been answered, and we look forward to talking with you again soon. Do take care.